Welcome back, my friends. My name is Sarah. I'm known as Carnivore Yogi. Thank you so much for being here and clicking on today's video. Today, I'm very excited to present an interview that I did with Dr. Stephanie Estima. And she is the author of a new book called The Betty Body. I will put all of her information in the information section below for you guys, so make sure you check that out below. But we really dove into hormones and keto, carnivore, fasting, all of these things, how those different protocols can affect your hormones and how that changes as we get older. So how we can't really look at, if we're in our 40s, someone that's in their 20s and do the same thing that they're doing, or even look at what we did in our 20s if we're in our 40s and do the same thing. It is as we age. So it doesn't have to be 20s or 40s. It could be 30s versus 50s and 40s versus 50s and so on and so forth. I hope you guys get the point. But I feel like this is a really important conversation we need to have. I talked about this in a video that I did earlier this week, so I'll make sure I link that one in the information section for you guys below as well, as far as how I'm optimizing my hormones and still utilizing some fasting, some carnivore, some keto, these different tools, but how I'm doing things a little bit differently now. And again, I really want to open up a dialogue, a conversation about this in the community. So please do comment below. Let me know how these different protocols have affected you hormonally and how you maybe have had to shift and change. I want to hear all that feedback, or maybe they haven't affected you and you're doing really great, and tell me how long you've been doing the protocols and what you've been doing. I really do want to, again, start this dialogue, start this conversation with you guys. So I hope you do enjoy this interview. And again, leave me comments below. I'm excited to hear what you think about it. All right, talk to you guys later. All right, you guys, thank you so much for coming back and tuning in. Today, I have Dr. Stephanie Estima, and I think that she has a wonderful story to share with women about how we respect our cycles, how we get more in tune with them. She has a great book, which I've got right here. I've been reading it. It's great. So I will put that in the show notes for you guys to check that out. But thank you, Dr. Estima, for being here today and talking with me.
I'm thrilled to be here. Thank you for inviting me.
Yeah. And the thing that we were just talking about off camera is you have quite an experience with keto and kind of being in this community. And I would love for you to kind of tell my viewers, my listeners, your story of keto and how all of that went down for you.
Sure. Yeah. So I started in the keto space, like becoming really interested in it about 5 or 6 years ago, because of a lot of the touted brain benefits. So, as you know, and as your audience is very likely familiar with, when you're running on ketones, a lot of people will report that they have clarity of thought. Of course, we see inflammation markers that come down, and they're able to perform and go longer, let's say, in the gym. Like that was one of the things that I also noticed was when I was in a state of ketosis, I felt like Superwoman. Like I could lift a truck if that was on my, on my training plan that day. But I started doing keto just kind of like I was seeing in the online space. So I would see guys doing the, what I call like the bacon butter burgers and repeat, right? It was like it was all about your macronutrients. It didn't really matter what the nutritious composition of the diet was. So as long as you were hitting, the 70-20-10 or the 80-10-10 or whatever, delineation of keto you were doing, it was fine. So that was, if you were having bacon with a side of bacon with some extra bacon, that was fine. If you were having tubs of sour cream, that was fine too. And for me and for my female patients who I was running a ketogenic program in my clinic, what we started to notice was a real difference between the outcomes for our men and our women. So the men would be like, gosh, doc, like this is the best program ever. Like I've been on it for 2 weeks. I've dropped like the 50 pounds that I wanted or the 20 pounds that I wanted. And, especially if it was a husband and wife couple, the woman would almost feel like, she had her tail between her legs and be like, we've been eating the same damn stuff and I've lost like 2 pounds, 3 pounds, like what gives? So it really wasn't until I started experimenting with a female focus. So looking at, for women in their reproductive age, looking at some of the different hormonal compositions that a woman has throughout the month. And in the book, as you mentioned in the Betty Body, we delineate between week 1, week 2, week 3, week 4, and what are some of the ways that you can alter both the macronutrient composition of the diet so that you can honor your hormonal physiology. Because for years, I mean, I think by nature of going through chiropractic school and having a professional degree, it's really easy to pretend like you're a little man, like as a woman, you
Yeah.
completely ignore, for me, I would, if I was feeling moody or crampy or,
Yeah.
right before my bleed week, I would just like put my head down, punch out the work, take medication to silence the symptoms that my body was trying to throw up as a flare. And it wasn't really until I started playing around with cycling the ketogenic diet that I was able to really help with female outcomes. So we were starting to see once and we'll talk a little bit about my protocol, hopefully, but
Yeah.
I love the idea of a therapeutic intervention. So we were talking, pre-chat about carnivore. Carnivore is a subcategory of the ketogenic diet, right? You're essentially eliminating all carbohydrates from the diet. You're having, nose to tail, hopefully. And then you're doing this ketogenic diet. A lot of women, particularly around the idea of autoimmunity, find a lot of benefit in the carnivore or very strict keto
Yep.
protocol. But as we were kind of alluding to before, we hit record, that doesn't last. And it's the same. The same is true when someone starts a vegan diet, right? When you transition from, if it's any sort of standard American, standard Canadian diet, the vegan diet is a vast improvement, right? So is
Right.
carnivore. And so you'll see these amazing benefits that you'll experience for 2, 3, 6 months. And then after a while, you start to, it almost feels like you're slipping backwards. And I think a lot of people say, oh gosh, you know what? It must be that I'm not doing vegan enough. Like I have to tighten up tighten up the reins and be hardcore, more vegan. And I think you also see that in the carnivore and keto community too, where you say, okay, like I'm not feeling as great anymore, but that means maybe I just got to go back to what I did that worked last time. I got to repeat the keto, repeat the carnivore. And over time, what we find is, I think, the ketogenic diet for women is incredibly useful as a therapeutic, like pure ketosis, no cycling, like all you are doing is keto or carnivore for a limited amount of time, like a therapeutic intervention is what I would call it. It's incredibly helpful for autoimmunity, for balancing your hormones, for weight loss, for brain, promoting healthy brain aging, for, reducing inflammation and stress. It has all of those benefits and more. But I think what is more appropriate when we take a look at a long-term lens is for women in particular to not necessarily be, or to be aiming to be in keto all the time.
Yep.
We can be going in and out of it with ease because our bodies, just, whether you like it or not, like our bodies require us to be changing our macronutrient composition of the diet to match our hormones because we run on this 28, 29, 30-day cycle, let's call it, depending on how long your menstrual cycle is. Whereas when we look at guys, they tend to run, when we look at their hormonal rhythm, they tend to operate on a 24-hour cycle. So they'll actually go through their testosterone and estrogen cycling. They'll do that every single day. So it's really easy for a guy to do keto for long term or carnivore for long term. And we see a lot of the, carnivore, we'll say experts or like really well known, like Paul Saladino. And we see all of these big, Sean Baker, we see all of these carnivore, luminaries, if you will, but they're men, right? And they'll say, look how great it is. And yes, it's great. But I think that we have to consider for women, our hormonal milieu and how that changes, not only month to month, but over the delta T of life. Like we are different in terms of our menstruation when we're in our 20s versus our 30s versus our 40s. So I think we have to nuance some of these protocols to fit with our female physiology.
I just love that. And, Paul now, he's actually eating some carbs. He's a big proponent of adding in carbohydrates because he works out a lot, So
And
I,
honey, I think he likes
yeah,
honey.
he likes
Yeah.
his honey a lot. Now, I know
Yeah.
a lot of my ladies have tried honey and it's kind of a big disaster for blood sugar. So I'm always
Mhm.
like, maybe let's start with some butternut squash,
Right.
before you throw the honey in there because
Right.
you haven't had carbs in so long. But so much of what you just said, I would love to unpack because, I'm 41 now, I'm almost 42. I didn't start tracking my cycle until about a year ago
Yep.
because I lost my cycle and I was like, wait a second, I'm too young for this. Like, I should not be losing my cycle at age 40. And so I had to go, I had to make some changes. I had to go super high fat. I had to stop eating like the bulk of my diet as protein. I had to stop fasting. So I
Hmm.
definitely want to talk about fasting in this conversation too, because I love
Yeah.
your take on it.
Hmm.
But I had to cut out all the fasting. I was fasting all the time. I was just eating high protein. I wasn't eating enough fat. I was able to get my cycle back. And now it's like every month I'm happy to get it. It's like a kind of a celebration and it's not painful. And I know you had a similar experience with that, but it's crazy how we don't teach women about their cycles. Like, how am I now 41 and now I care and I know when it comes and I track and I can, all of that. But I spent all of those years, I got my cycle at 13 and I had no idea how my body worked. Like, we just
Yeah.
don't teach women how the body works and how to work with that at all.
That's exactly right. We don't teach our young girls about fertility. We teach them to fear their fertility, right?
Yes.
Like you
Yeah.
can get pregnant. Like I was talking on a podcast recently, and it was a fertility awareness educator, and I remember telling her, I used to think, and maybe this is just by nature of being raised Catholic, I don't know, but it was like I used to think that going into a swimming pool, like I could get pregnant, if
Yeah.
there was another guy and there was something, So I had no idea how it works. And it really, your story in terms of tracking your cycle only in your 40s, you're not
Yeah.
the only one. There's a lot of women who are completely oblivious to length of their cycle, how long each phase is. They have no idea when they're ovulating. They have no idea why, for example, in the days before they get their period, that they feel so upset, right? They feel like they can't sleep and they feel like agitated and everyone's bothering them. And what I talk about in the book is that in that particular little phase of our cycle, like those 2 to 4 days
Hmm.
before you get your period, when if you're someone who experiences, what one might label premenstrual syndrome or
Hmm.
PMS, this is actually a beautiful time. Your body now is throwing up again a flare for you to look at the things in your life that are not working for you. So
Hmm.
a lot of times that in that period of time, it's like your partner can't do anything right. Kids are driving you up the wall, your boss is driving you nuts, you can't find, like, you can't pick the right outfit, you can't pick the right nail polish, like your makeup's wrong, everything's wrong. But that's actually a time for us as women to reflect on the things that are not working and to honor and acknowledge them, so that in the next cycle, right, that we can
Yep.
begin to change those things. So when comes time again to reevaluate the boss, the career, your parent, your relationship with your children, your relationship with your partner, your clothes, your body composition, then you can say, okay, like these are the things that my body's telling me that I need to pay attention to. And that negativity bias is like that, our propensity to say, God, everything's not working, is actually really healthy.
Yeah.
We want to be looking at the things that are not working so that we can make changes in that next cycle or 2 cycles or 3 or whatever, to make progress there.
Yeah, I think that's so important. And the thing is, when I first started carnivore, I would go in a lot of the Facebook groups and all the women would say, I do so great on this, but the week before my period, I totally lose it and eat a
Yeah.
bunch of chocolate and I can't help it. It's like
Yeah.
something takes over my body and I literally can't help it, And for
Yeah.
me, the only way to stay carnivore or that I had was able to is to just go super, super, super high fat and like take the protein way down. But I think that that's not going to be something that a lot of people are going to want to do. And I think that we shouldn't demonize adding in some foods that actually support our hormones during that time as well. So would you talk about that just a little bit as well?
Of course. Yeah. I mean, that period, like those women that are like that last week, I don't know what's going on. Well, let me tell you what's going on. Your body is creating an organ, right? It's
Yes.
thickening up an endometrial lining, hoping to receive a fertilized egg, whether you want children or not. That is your biology. So it is absolutely essential for you to increase not only your total calories, but if I were to, for example, if I were to take a blood draw from you in that week before you start bleeding, we would see your free fatty acids would be lower than the week before, your amino
Mhm.
acids lower than the week before, glucose lower than the week before, along with minerals like vitamin D and glutathione, master antioxidant, selenium, zinc, like all the things, magnesium, because your body is literally throwing all of those substrates into the endometrial lining to help thicken it up and be a source for that fertilized egg.
Mm.
So I often will completely change. I will often counsel women in that week before their period to just up the calories. And I know that that can seem radical and it can seem really scary because women, we've been really conditioned, like eat less, exercise more, eat like
Mhm.
calorie restrict so that we can be skinny or look a certain way or whatever. But it's really important that that you honor again, this is where you need to honor your physiology and say, like, I need more energy substrate, not because there's something wrong with me or I don't have willpower or because I wanted that chocolate. I'm damaged. I can't do
Yep.
carnivore. It's your body creating this new organ, which is, that's life. So
Yep.
to increase your calories, to increase your carbohydrates this week, I promise I used to try and do that too. And
Yep.
I wrote about this in the book where I would prep the meals and, I would have my bag with all my pre-prep meals for the day. And then that week predictably every week I would clean out like the chips, the cookies, the crackers, I'd be like rocking on the floor going like, what happened? Like, what,
Yep.
but that's what happens when you resist your biology. Your hormones are very, very powerful and they will do what is necessary to get the energy in.
Yeah, I always try to tell people that your body is trying to keep you alive. And, if you start not having a cycle, right? Or if it starts coming early, or if you start spotting mid cycle, your body's trying to tell you something. Like
Correct.
you're not giving it what it needs. And that's what kind of, like I said, it stopped me dead in my tracks of like, okay, maybe I need to stop listening to all of these men who are telling me how I should eat for my body and take a little step back here and do something a little bit different. Because when we're not getting a cycle or when it's off, it's because the body has decided to shut off the blood flow to our reproductive organs because we're like, we have to keep you alive. We
Right.
have to
Right.
adapt,
Yeah.
you know?
hmm
Yeah.
And women are generally, when you think about our composition versus a guy, we are generally more defensive of our fat stores.
Hmm.
Again, whether or not you want children, your body is going to defend those last 5 to 10 pounds much more aggressively than a male, because if you become pregnant, we're going to need that sort of backup, that insurance, if you will, to make sure that the pregnancy can be, that it's not fatal to you or the baby,
Hmm.
and that you're going to have enough food to be able to maintain and deliver on that pregnancy. So you'll often find, as you get closer, and I was just talking about this in my community last night, as you get closer to your ideal weight, what you'll find is that your body will now reserve those last 5 or 10 like it's actually harder to get into the adipose tissue
Yep.
and to use that as energy. Your body will actually start to eat up your muscle, right? It'll start to use your muscle as a substrate because it's like, well, we don't need this much muscle, so we'll just we'll kind of use this instead of the fat. So you have to be very strategic around protein and carbs.
Hmm.
Carbohydrates, in my, like, I've completely done a 180 because I used to think more along the lines of like a very strict carnivore, like carbs
Yep.
are the devil.
Yep.
It's going to give us all type 2 diabetes and that's what's causing it all. And while I think that that's true for a large majority of the population who's eating processed foods in the standard American diet and has absolutely no idea how many carbohydrates, and we can kind of get in, we can maybe shelf this, but like the type of carbohydrate matters, right? Like
Yes.
if it's breaking down into glucose or fructose, like that's going to have two totally physiological different impacts on the body. So for a woman, I think that, pulsing with protein and carbohydrates are really important, particularly if you want to preserve lean muscle mass.
Mm.
And I'm a really big fan of once you sort of get that therapeutic benefit from the carnivore, from the keto, for you to begin to cycle, because then you can start like I don't use like the word manipulate, but manipulate, some of your pathways, like growth
Yeah.
pathways, longevity pathways, so that you can, so that you can kind of get the best of both worlds.
Yeah, and I think this is a great topic for my audience because I talk to so many women who are just stuck, and it's not the last 10 pounds, it's 20, 30, 40 pounds. They're
Right.
stuck. They've been doing this for a while and they can't get the scale to move. And so what they're being told is, and it breaks my heart that I've talked to a lot of women that have paid $500 for like a consultation from kind of a keto or one of the gurus, and they're just told to do fasts. You need to
Mm.
start adding in a 48-hour fast every week or a 36-hour fast every single week. um you know
Hell no.
cut your fat down.
No,
I
no.
know, if I'm
Yeah.
like, please don't do that, please, please,
Yeah.
please don't do that.
Yeah.
So I would love to speak to them, like, and I would love, we can go through your protocol if you think that would be appropriate, but I would love to talk to those women who are just like super stuck. They've been doing either keto or carnivore for a really long time,
Yeah.
and it's not just 10 pounds, it's 30 or 40 pounds, and they're just
Yeah.
frustrated.
Yeah, I think that the fasting is a really important topic. So I talk a lot about this
Yes.
in the book as well. And I think, again, my view on fasting has also softened, right, as it relates to women. So I used to do the same thing. Like I would see people doing the 5-day fast. I would do the 5-day
Yep.
fast. I would
Yep.
see people doing 7-day fast. I would try to do 7-day fast. And then I would wonder why I didn't get my period the next
Right,
month,
exactly.
It's like, I don't
Exactly.
understand this. Like I did such a good thing. I was fasting.
Yep.
So I think generally, when we look at the data, and this is also very important as well to understand that where some of these protocols come from, when we look at the literature, most of the literature done is on men. So when
Mhm.
we look at some of the benefits that we hear touted for fasting, increased fertility, increased
Yeah.
cognition, getting into ketosis, all like improving your sex hormones, improving your growth hormones, all of these things. Most of that is true if you are a male. But
Yes.
what we actually look at when we look in the research, and I'll also just say this as well, for obese, so if you are classified as obese, whether you're male or female, those are also true for you as well. So if you have excess adipose tissue, you have more, your body mass index would be over 30, for example, then more aggressive fasting under supervision can be beneficial.
Yep.
But for the most of us, the last 20 to 40 pounds, what we often find for women when we do aggressive fasts, and I'll say aggressive, meaning that it's a water only fast and it's longer than 24 hours. So I talk in the
Mhm.
book, I talk about sort of different, I call them levers, right? So you can
Yep.
there's different types of fasts. Like you can do a bone broth fast, you can do a fasting mimetic. You can also do just a pure water fast. You can do a dry fast. Like a lot of Muslims for Ramadan, they do just completely dry fasting. So there's different types of fasts. There's lengths of fast, right? So is it every day that you break the fast? Is it once a
Mhm.
day, once every 2 days, that kind of thing? And then the frequency with which you engage in that. So, um, for women, what we find is when women either aggressively caloric restrict or they intermittent fast too aggressively, what we see in the literature is, and of course, these have been done on, I also preface this by saying, like, I'm quoting rodent models here. So you can't
Right.
100% extrapolate to humans. But what I can say is the data that when we look at some of this literature, I see that data replicating in my female patients. So like my women will say, oh yeah, my sleep totally gets messed up when I do a long
Yeah.
fast, or my period gets messed up. But what I'm talking about with these studies is they actually looked at rodents, male and female, and they put them in, kind of a standard rat chow. They could eat ad libitum, doesn't matter. And then they did one group where they had a 20% caloric restriction and they intermittent fast. So they would only give them food for a certain time of day. And then they looked at the so from 20%, and then the third cohort was 40% fasting, caloric restriction, and then intermittent fasting as well. And what they found over the course of 6 months was really quite scary. So what they found was, not for men, like increased testosterone, increased
Mm.
virility, better energy, they had all of these different improvements. For women, what they found was that their ovaries shrank. They
Oh,
became
wow.
amenorrheic, meaning that they did not menstruate, like they did not have their regular menses. They had they had more disturbed sleep. So rats are nocturnal animals, so they typically sleep during the day and they're awake at night.
Mm.
And what they found was that they were awake more often for a longer period of time. And if you kind of look at an evolutionary lens with this, you might extract and say, well, they're trying to forage over maybe a larger perimeter of area in order to find food.
Mm.
And then they also saw increased stress responses as well. So learning and memory was affected. So when you put them in mazes and stuff, like they couldn't figure out with the same competency as their male counterparts did. So all of these things, you're like, what the hell, And then when I see women, when I talk to my women who are trying the 36, 48, 72-hour fast, they'll say, yeah, you know what, I can't sleep, or I'm shaking overnight, or I'm sweating, or I feel like no matter what I do, I feel confused. I have this brain fog. So we have to be careful as women in terms of how aggressively we fast. And we also want to take into consideration our hormonal, if there's any hormonal dysregulation. So like my
Mm-hmm.
ladies with PCOS, polycystic ovary syndrome, they typically respond better to water fasts. And
Mm-hmm.
maybe the 1 24-hour fast a week might do really well for them, because what we know about typically with PCOS, part of the dysregulation in the androgens, in the excess testosterones that they experience, is that it has its roots in like insulin dysregulation. So bringing down the insulin through a water fast might be wonderful for them. But for someone who has estrogen dominance, so if you're someone
Mm-hmm.
who has the PMS, if you have your rings don't fit,
Yep.
the days or so before your period, you have digestive upset, your breasts are tender and swollen to touch, you feel distended, a water fast you can do it, but it's really painful to do that,
Mm-hmm.
especially when you take into account what we just said, which is in week 4, you actually need more calories. So
Yep.
if you're fasting and you're taking away those calories, that is one of the hardest times to do that kind of fast. So you really do need to know where you are in your cycle.
Yep.
And then you want to overlay that with what is the hormonal profile of the woman, right? Is she
Yep.
chronically stressed? Is she, taking care of young children or aging parents? Or does she have a lot going on in her life where her hypothalamic pituitary adrenal axis is already kind of taxed?
Yes.
Do we want to like overlay that with a 36-hour fast? Probably not.
Right.
Um, and this kind of goes into what has been more of an emerging philosophy for me, in that, being healthy shouldn't be hard,
Yep.
like it shouldn't feel difficult. I like to do, for me personally, I sort of do a daily, time restricted eating. So I
Mm-hmm.
like to, eat my last meal like 2 to 3 hours before I go to bed. So for me, that's like 6:30.
Yep.
But I will typically eat from about 8 o'clock. So I will, 8 o'clock in the morning after my workout, I have my post workout, shake or whatever. So I'm eating for, what is that, 10 hours,
Mm-hmm.
sometime like the week before my period, forget it. I'm eating like,
Yeah.
12 hours, almost
Yeah.
all day long. So it really depends on the woman, where she's in her cycle, and then, what her goals are as well. Because I think a lot of women will say, oh, I want to fast to lose weight.
Right.
Or what breaks my fast? Like that's another, like, what breaks
Oh
the fast?
gosh.
Is it the
The
coffee that breaks
question.
that
The organ
question?
meat pills break the fast. Is you're like,
Right. Right.
yeah.
Right. Right. So I think that fasting is really, I think it's very useful, but I think
Yeah.
for women, we have to generally step back and say, okay, how can we make this less painful? Right?
Yeah.
We already have this big, like this reproductive system, this cycle that we have to honor. Does it have to be that is it a good idea for me to be fasting for 48 hours once a week,
Right.
or 72 hours once a quarter, whatever? The answer might be yes. But it's more likely than not, it's no.
Yeah. And for me, even I did a 75 hard, which is like all the rage these days, but I did
Mm.
it like it's been well over a year ago. It was
What is that? Is
2009.
that 75 days and you work out twice a day? Is
You
that what
would do,
it is?
yeah, you do
Yeah.
like, well, we kind of modified it. I was with other community, but we modified it. So every day you do a 16-8.
Mm.
Every day you get at least 20 minutes of movement and you stick to carnivore. And
Hmm.
so that was the end of my cycle. I had
Right.
done a 7-day water fast a couple of months before that. That knocked me off. But then just doing 16-8 for 75 days straight
It's a lot.
totally wrecked me.
Yeah.
I was like, I'm going into early menopause. Like
Hmm.
that's where I was at age 40. I was like, this is not okay.
Yeah.
And so I even tell people, I know you say this as well, trying to do 16-8 every single day, you know, is also probably not the best idea for women as well.
Agreed. Yeah,
Yeah.
I like a 12-12, honestly.
Yeah.
I like a 12-12. That's nice and easy, right? There's like a little
Yeah.
bit of a, you got a little bit of a fast right after you wake up, or right before you go to bed, which is going to also help with your circadian biology and help with the stomach emptying and a better restful sleep, which is also really good for all, a whole manner of sins. But yeah, I think a 12-12 is like really great,
Yeah.
10-14, really great. Like those are
Yeah.
really, really good and they're gentle. And it's really, it's not about I think a lot of women get tripped up, myself included. I'm a type A personality. I like to achieve, I like to perform. So if you don't get the 16-8, you're like, God, I'm such a failure, you know?
Right.
So if you do the 10-14, you're like, God, it doesn't even matter. Like
Right.
that I did that. It's like I'm still a failure, right? That's like the worst F word for a type A personality. That's like the F word that you never want to hear. But I think that there's something to be said about just trying to be gentle and cutting some of those energetic cords that you have to do it one way
Hmm.
and to be so stagnant in your thinking.
Yeah.
One of the things that we see, I mean, this is not about carnivore, but this is more about, social media and a comment on society is
Hmm.
what I see on social media now is much more inflexible thinking.
Hmm.
You don't like what I talk about, you're canceled. You don't
Yes.
like, you can't listen to my opinion. I'm blocking you. You're off, like I think that for women in particular, it is so important for us to protect that flexibility of thought when it comes to our body. If you set out to do a 16-8 today, but you're like barking mad starving, like just
Yeah.
end the fast. Like just give yourself that grace, like make it easy. Your body knows far more than, we like to pretend that our brains are the master control system. And of course, like they are, but when your body tells you that you're hungry, listen to her. She knows
Hmm.
what she's talking about.
Yeah, I feel like there's such a push to just do it harder, do it faster, get the workout in. And when I talk with women one on one, a lot of the time, it's sometimes hard for me to get a word in edgewise because they're just so like in this driven place.
Hmm.
And it's so hard for them to just come down and just to
Yeah.
rest. And even myself, I've been teaching yoga for over a decade, and that's like, I'm the yoga teacher. For me, I had to totally crash in order to start respecting rest and respecting, like, I'm a different woman 4 weeks a month. Like, I'm not the same woman on week 1 that I am on week 4. And I have to take care of that woman. And I can't force her to do the same stuff I did on week 1 as I did on week 4. But I think that we're just so terrified that if we let up a little bit that we're going to gain 100 pounds or it's
Yeah.
it's going to cause major issues.
So many women are afraid of slowing down, myself
Yeah.
included. I
Yeah.
resisted it for years. But when one of the workarounds cognitively that I like to offer people is that that's actually where all your gains happen. When you sleep, your brain clears out all that brain crud, all the,
Hmm.
beta amyloid plaques and the tau tangles and all the stuff that accumulated during the day. When you rest your muscles, that's when they grow, right? It's not when you go to the gym and you pump the iron. That's when you break down the muscle. It's when you give
Yes.
yourself the day off the next day or 2 days is when your muscles repair and they grow. And the same is true for our nutrition. When we just give ourselves a break, like just
Hmm.
psychologically, right? Like just giving yourself a diet break, I
Yeah.
think is really, really important for the adherence to whatever diet that you're choosing to do. And I think for many women, like you said, you knocked it right out of the park with the with that sentiment that we're so scared that if we stop for a minute, that
Mm-hmm.
we're going to gain 100 pounds, we'll never be able to start again. And I think that a lot of us are running away from, we all have an inner sloth, right? We all have like an
Yeah.
inner lazy girl that just wants to like hang around and do nothing.
Mm-hmm.
But the more that you try to run away from those desires to slow down, the harder it's going to hit you on the other side. You said, like, I had to crash, right? I had to
Yep.
crash and burn before like, your body will find a way to make you listen to her. So she may just whisper, hey, we should, have a little diet break this week. And if you continue to like push the carnivore, push the, carb restriction, push the, whatever, eventually you're going to like lose your period, or you're
Mm-hmm.
going to, something's going to happen that your body's going to scream at you in order for you to hear her. So, yeah.
Yeah. Well, I'd love to go through how you approach a month with diet, with exercise, and how women can actually. And you're not telling people, I'm like reading your book, you've got some recipes and foods in there. You're not telling people with a diet break to go out and get cupcakes and get ice cream every single night. It's, I think we take that out of context as well in the low carb space, is like,
Well, we go to the extreme, right? It's like, what?
yeah.
She's telling me I need to eat 4 bags of Doritos on my diet. Like, forget it. I'm never doing that. It's like, why don't you just have like more salad?
Right. Like,
Yeah.
we need to put this, I'd love for you to just go through that so we can put it in a context for people. Cause yeah, when people hear carb cycling, I feel like they hear
Yeah.
cupcakes or ice cream.
Right, right. Yeah. So, first, I think it's important to know that all carbs are not created equal, just like all calories are not created equal.
Yes.
So, a lot of the carbohydrates that I advocate for are things like green leafy vegetables, where we have long starchy chains. So, we're not talking about monosaccharides and disaccharides. We're talking about the squash that you mentioned, or
Hmm.
kale, or Swiss chard, or bok choy, or, where we have a lot of insoluble fiber, which, by the way, for my carb, people who are scared of carbs, those don't count towards your carb count, because they're not digested, in the small intestine. They can't be made to use for energy. They're too long, so they actually pass through to the large intestine for digestion. So soluble fiber, insoluble fiber, we get, and when you're having vegetables, all colors of the rainbow, so peppers and Brussels sprouts and mushrooms and all the things, you're also getting like the polyphenols. So anytime you have like a colored vegetable, so like the red peppers, the yellow peppers, the beets, like all of these things have like very high concentrations of antioxidants and polyphenols, which are very good for lowering your inflammation. I will just say as well, I never have green peppers, because that is simply an unripened pepper. I don't know if many people know that, but
Yeah.
green,
One of my friends was talking about that the other day. They're all kind of the same thing, but they are
yes,
different shades of ripeness.
exactly. So you can
Yeah.
have a green pepper if you like it, but I like to get yellow, orange, and like red is like a fully actualized pepper.
My daughter, so I have a 13-year-old who's non-speaking autistic, but
Mm,
she is super picky about what she'll eat. And I have her a lot, a lot of low carb, but with the peppers, she will only eat the red ones. So if I
yeah.
buy a bag of like little mini peppers, she'll throw the others away
Oh,
and just
gosh.
eat the red ones. So
I
it's so
love that.
funny that you say that.
I love the red peppers. So,
Yeah.
I mean, if you like the green peppers, like, I don't want to start a war, like, have the green pepper, but I'm just telling you that it's an unripened pepper. So you get all the polyphenols, all the soluble fiber, all of these things. Squash is also really great as well. Sweet potatoes, yams, all these things. I
Mhm.
love purple potatoes. Those are one of my favorites. I like to make fries out of them. So, when we're thinking about how we might lay this out over the course of a month or a menstrual cycle, for a lot of women, well, all women, there's 2 phases, right? We have the follicular phase, and it's named after the follicle, which is the main reason why we're all here. We want the follicle to mature so that it can release an egg. And then the second phase is called the luteal phase, or the secretory phase. So now the follicle has released the egg, and it becomes something called the corpus luteum, which is what the
Mhm.
luteal phase is referring to. And then that begins to secrete progesterone.
Yes.
So, generally, in those 2 phases, in that follicular phase, we are much more adept for carnivore and keto generally here. We can carb restrict with ease, your bleed week and the week before you ovulate. In the luteal phase, as we creep towards menses, if you are someone who has a tendency to get inflamed, like I was talking about before, the digestion, the sleep stuff, the bloating, all of that, the moodiness and the irritability, this is a generally a better time for more carbohydrates, those starchy carbohydrates. I also talk in the book about something called resistant starches, which also really help with craving. So for the ladies that are like, that week, and then I just go crazy on the chocolate, if you incorporate resistant starches, and I outline in the book like what kinds and how often and what the dosing should be, but resistant starches will also really help to curb your cravings. They will improve the lining of your gut, so it's going to help some of your digestive. A lot of people kind of get gassiness and
Oh
distension
yeah,
and stuff,
bloating. Yep.
and the bloating. So the resistant starches will really help with that. It also helps with sleep and helps with mood and craving. So it's really beautiful to dose that in your luteal, like the second part of your cycle. So the way that I structure the carb cycling or keto cycling is in that first week. So on your bleed, I like you to do keto. Now, a lot of people first day or two, they're kind of crampy and lethargic. So, easy there, you can have a diet break there. But then once you kind of get into the rhythm of things, you can go keto or carnivore that week. The week after, so you stopped your bleed week, we're leading up to ovulation. Typically, what I'd like to suggest is a higher protein and higher carbohydrate concentration. And then I like to pull down the fat. So, maybe in week, depending on how I have always done like a 70-20-10. So like 70 fat, 20 protein, 10 carbs. But if you're carnivore, that might be skewed, right? It might just be like 90 and then 10 and then not 0, right? So it might, like depending on your preferences. But in week 2, I like the fat to be about 40%, protein, and then 20% carbohydrates. So we have a higher protein macronutrient composition as well as carbohydrates, and this is going to activate pathways many pathways, but one in particular called mTOR, which is mammalian target of rapamycin. This is a growth pathway. So for women in their 30s and their 40s and beyond, really 50s, 60s, 70s, we want to be thinking about like pulsing the activation of this pathway, because this is going to help us create structural elements like muscle. So when you have mTOR activated, this is a lot of bodybuilders, eat a very high protein diet in order to activate this growth pathway, so that they can continuously use the protein for building these structural elements like a myocyte, or making the muscle cell bigger. But you don't want it, I disagree with the bodybuilding community insofar as we don't want this pathway activated all the time, because in the same way that it can activate growth for the muscle cell, it can also promote growth for other cells that we don't want, like cancer cells. So I really like to pulse the mTOR activation with higher protein in week 2. And then in week 3, now we're in the luteal phase. So we come back to keto for a week, but now we're increasing the resistant starch intake that we were talking about. And then in week 4, we come back to that higher protein, higher carbohydrate composition of the diet, as well as bumping up all your calories. So calories might go, 10 to 20%, increase depending on the needs of the person. And like 10% is not a ton, right?
Right. We're not telling us to eat 1,000 calories more per day.
It's not eating all the cupcakes, as you said.
Right.
It's like, it's another serving of squash. It's another serving of your Brussels sprouts. It's another serving of your kale chips or whatever you're doing. So, and that's how I typically structure the nutrition. And I think that's how it's sustainable, right?
Yeah.
As humans are, we're finicky people. If it's always going to be painful, the likelihood of us doing it over the long term is very low. So if you have these weeks where you're restricting and then you're opening up, and then restricting and then opening up, you're going to get some variety, which is always a good thing.
Yeah.
But it's easier to stick to that. And as you learn your cycle, you can also begin to plate and like modulate the macronutrient composition yourself, right? And say, okay, well, she says 40, 40, 20 in week 2, but I really need, 50, 40, 10, or I
Right.
really need more carbs, right? So I'll take away from the fat. Maybe I'll do 30, 40, 30 or something.
Right.
Um, so that's kind of the beauty of nutrition, right? We can really begin to personalize it to our own needs. If you're weight training, you're going to need more
Mhm.
protein and carbohydrates, really, because those are two things that are going to create they're going to create that
Yep.
anabolic
Muscle
growth
growth.
effect, muscle growth. Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
Would you say with fasting that if people did want to do, if women did want to lean into a little bit more fasting period, you should probably do it within that maybe first 10 days of your cycle or so, or the first week or so?
If it's just a water fast, yeah, I would say
Yeah.
like in the first 7-ish days, like on your bleed week, that might be a good time for it. You can also do things like bone broth fasting or
Hmm.
fasting mimetics, right? So we have Dr. Walter Longo has
Hmm.
a company, I think it's called Prolon, where he gives you all your prepackaged foods. Now, I've done the Prolon thing. I think it's great to do once or twice, but you can also just mimic, you can also just have two
Yeah.
avocados a day and you have like the same caloric,
Yeah.
um, breakdown there. But I would say that you can do mimetics, you can do fasting mimetics, you can do bone broth, you can do just a general caloric restriction that is going to do the same thing throughout the cycle, and even in that third and fourth week, and particularly in the third week, if someone notices that they kind of get that puffy PMSy kind of
Yeah.
stuff, bone broth fasting and fasting mimetics, this is a good time for it because we're going to bring down some of the insulin response by slightly restricting. And it's not too long. Like you do 3, maybe you do, like, if you're doing a bone broth fast, you might do it for 1 day, maybe
Yeah.
2. The mimetic diet is 5 days. And I think it's a little long,
Yeah.
but you can transiently caloric restrict and see how you feel and see if your period, like when you actually do bleed, if you see an improvement, right? Do we see an
Hmm.
improvement in color, in length, in clotting, in all of the different, in all of the different things, that all the data that we can extrapolate from our menstruation?
Yeah, and one thing that I feel like happens a lot is that people kind of ignore the exercise component. And one thing I've been trying to talk with a lot of the women that come to me is like resistance training has got to be a non-negotiable, especially as we get older. We can't
Agreed.
just, and in the carnivore community, people are like, oh, you just eat enough protein. And I'm like, no, that's it's just not how it works
No,
because
if
your
you eat
body
enough
can.
protein, you're not going to be able to do a pull-up. Like, you got to train that. Yeah.
Right. And
Yeah.
your muscles, your body becomes insulin resistant. It's not
Mhm.
always just the food. Like we have to build muscle in order to be metabolically healthy as well.
Well, that's a really good point, actually. That's another thing that I noticed in practice as well, is that women who are on keto for a very long time or just very low carbohydrate, like
Hmm.
you might see in the carnivore community, they actually are more insulin resistant over
Yes.
time.
Okay, I want to talk about this because I'm seeing this also.
Yeah. So you might, what I would do in terms of testing is I would give them something called an oral glucose tolerance test, which is just
Hmm.
like a gross drink of like 75
Oh
grams
yeah, I
of.
had one when I was pregnant. It was nasty.
It's just
It's the
it's
worst.
so mean, right?
It
So,
is.
but what you find is if you are keto or if you're carnivore, you have a postprandial glucose spike. Like your insulin and your after you take in that OGTT is so whacked out that you would never expect. You're like, but I'm low carb. And it's like, yeah,
Right.
and you're low carb, you have low insulin. So your cells down regulate their sensitivity. So you become more insulin resistant because it's not around. So it's very similar to kind of the use it or lose it principle with fitness, right? If you want to squat, you gotta, you will progressively overload, but then if you stop and you come back to it 3 or 4 months from now, your body has also scaled
Adapted.
back, right? It's
Hmm.
adapted. So the same is true for keto and carnivore. We see more long term, we see them more insulin resistant, which is why I like to pulse the carbs.
Yeah.
But yeah, to your point around training, I think that every single woman, every single, irrespective of age, she needs to be lifting weights.
Yeah.
If not any other reason than in the last year or so now, we've seen this pandemic, and one of the big things that we're seeing is the people who are more likely to have complications from COVID-19 tend to have these other comorbidities like increased fat or increased adiposity, right? Like they're considered obese, they have poor pulmonary function, poor cardiovascular function, and resistance training is like training your resistance, like you become harder to kill. So I think that it's important for every single woman to be training at least her body weight. If she's never done lifted weights, like you should at least be able to squat your body weight, push up your body weight, you should be able to pull up your body weight. And those are, for the most part, what I have found is most women can't do that. Like they can't
Right.
do a push up on their toes, they can't pull up their body weight. So it's important to be training all through the month. And then in the book, we talk about like how you can change that as, your hormonal composition changes as well.
Yeah, I think, and I was reading in there, you've got some workouts in there as well and
Mhm.
structure throughout the month, which I think is really helpful because a lot of women are like, well, what do I even do? So
Right.
you guys grab the book if you're curious about how to train during the month and then how to even just get started, because we can't ignore this. We need to be building muscle as we get older. We really do. It's so
Mhm.
important.
Yes. Amen.
Yeah. And I want to jump back a little bit to what you were saying about the insulin resistance after. And I think this is where a lot of these women that are coming to me with still 30, 40 plus pounds to lose,
Hmm.
they've been keto and carnivore for a year, 2 years. I have one woman who was doing it 10 years and she just kind of continues to gain weight,
Right.
even while being super, super strict. How would you have them kind of slowly come out of that and start getting their body so that they can be a little bit more metabolically flexible? Because you don't want them to go, this is what I see is like, okay, well, I'm going to just try the carbs, and they go and they eat like baked potatoes and they do it too quickly.
Hmm.
And then it like kind of swings them the other way. Oh, this isn't working. So I'm going to go straight back to what I was doing because at least
Hmm.
I felt good doing that. So could you talk to that a little bit?
Sure. Yeah. I think that when we're dealing with someone who's been carnivore for 10 years and they are continuously, their weight is, increasing year over year,
Hmm.
it's the insulin resistance that you were talking about. I would also say that this is hypercortisolemia as well. So there's a high
Yes.
cortisol, chronic cortisol secretion, because this is a stressful diet for a woman to do for a decade.
Yeah.
So I would, one of the things that we would want to start working on is just even in terms of movement, because a lot of these women will also say, oh, and you know what I do? I also spin 3 times or five
Oh,
times a
yeah.
week. Like I do high intensity interval training 5 times a week. So what I do is I take that out. Like you get
Yeah.
one of those workouts a week, one hit. And then I would do a lot more general low grade movement, like walking. Resistance training would be in there as well. But then in terms of the nutrition, I would start them cycling. So they can do a week of carnivore, makes them happy, right? But then you bring them out of that the next week by increasing the protein, coming down on the fat, and then upping the carbohydrate. And the carbohydrates should be those green leafy vegetables.
Hmm.
And a lot of women, if she's been carnivore for a decade, she's probably going to have a hard time with cauliflower and broccoli. So
Yeah.
I would like lightly steam them, so that we're getting rid of some of the, we'll call it digestive duress,
Yeah.
that can happen when you have raw vegetables. So I would definitely be steaming them, and then I would be like portioning them out. Like I would get a weight scale, and they would have maybe 3 ounces, or 3 to 3.5 ounces of a carbohydrate bolus on their meal, on their plate, and then kind of scale up and then pull back, right, and then
Yep.
scale up and then pull back. So um, that's how I would on the surface kind of look at a problem like that. But definitely she should not be carnivore for another decade.
Yeah, there's people are just so terrified again, and that's the other reason I wanted to bring you on is because they think like if I start with the 3 ounces of cauliflower, I'm going to gain 10 pounds that week.
Yeah. Yeah.
And you may see that you have a little bit more water retention because you're not used to that, but I don't think you're going to gain fat from
Or just
adding in.
go for a walk or work out after you do it, because then you're going to get those
Right.
carbs right into the muscle, so that you can actually build your muscle. And also, when we look at weight, this is another thing that we have to just break up with the scale. And
Yes.
women who weigh themselves every day, like you should weigh yourself, and this is going to sound maybe once a month is how often you should weigh
I
yourself.
only weigh at the gynecologist, and then I'm
Yeah.
like, oh, okay, cool.
You are different. Like you are going to hold more water. Like remember we were talking about that week 4.
Yeah.
You have another organ, right? You're going to be
Yes.
heavier. You're going to be retaining water. But that doesn't mean that you're failing on your diet. That just means that's what happens. Like you're a woman.
Right.
That's what happens. So I think we have to really I don't like weighing at all. I actually prefer to look at measurements. Like what is your
Yeah.
waist to hip ratio? That's the one I'm most concerned with because we want, when you divide your waist into your hips, it should be at least zero point 0.8 or less, because
Yeah.
that's going to give me an indication of visceral fat, right? If you're having, processed foods, but it's carnivore or it's keto, a lot of that is fructose, which is
Yeah.
100% metabolized by the liver. And if you have, without kind of getting into like some of the geeky biochemistry of it, like you have two options, right? With fructose, you either use it,
Mm-hmm.
burn it in the mitochondria, or it'll go under something called de novo lipogenesis, where you are creating fat. So it's either exported as a triglyceride or your liver holds onto it. And then we get fatty liver disease, which is a really
Mm.
big problem. And you don't have to be obese, right?
Yeah, it's a
That's the other
huge
thing.
problem. Yeah.
For NAFLD, you do not need to be obese to have it. You can have what's called TOFI, like thin on the outside, fat on the inside,
Mm-hmm.
like the skinny fat. People who are
Yep.
thin, but their visceral fat is horrendous. So yeah, that's my little geeky magic carpet ride on on fructose. But yeah,
Yeah. And, for me, when I had started, because I've been adding plants back into my diet since January, I decided, you know what, it's time for me to do this. And I'm not somebody who you hear some people that go carnivore and they're like, I never liked vegetables. I'm like, I always really loved vegetables. I
Mm,
just had to stop eating them because they inflamed the hell out of me.
right.
But now that I've got that taken care of, I've worked on my gut. I've done other things besides diet to get my gut healed,
Yeah,
with some digestive enzymes and taking HCl and probiotics. And I've worked hard on it to get to where I am.
yeah,
And I added things in really slowly, but I would, and maybe I was kind of crazy, but like if I'm going to have a meal with like a lot more carb in it, like Brussels sprouts per se, if I'm freaking out about it, I can go and take a walk after dinner. And if I take
yeah.
my blood sugar and it's a little higher, I can go and just walk for 10 or 20 minutes and it comes down,
Right.
and eat the carbs last, so I'll eat the protein and fat and the carbs come last. And if I really want to, I can do some squats, I can just go do some body weight squats and my body can actually use that. And I have actually lost weight since adding the plants back in and stopping the strict carnivore. And so I'm trying to encourage people like, yes, I think it can help you with autoimmune stuff and it can be a great tool, but we have to stop this like put ourselves in a box and it has to be this way
Yeah,
forever type of thinking, because I think it's
yeah.
dangerous.
And that's disordered eating, right?
Yes.
That's
Yeah.
disordered eating. Like if you have to only be one thing forever and you
Yeah.
don't have the flexibility to ebb and flow as you change, because we all change with time,
Yes.
that's disordered thought, and I think disordered eating as well.
Yeah. And, I know you have to go pretty soon, but I want to touch on something you said in the very beginning that I think is so, so important, is that as women, we can't compare ourselves to, so as a 41-year-old, I can't look at what a 25-year-old is doing. I
Right.
can't look at what a 35-year-old is doing.
Hmm.
And because we see this a lot on social media, like, oh, so-and-so does this and does this fasting and does that. And I'm like, yeah, she's 24. If I try to do that as a 41-year-old woman, I'm going to screw myself over.
Yeah, I think that there's, generally we live in a very toxic patriarchal society that
Yeah.
values youth over everything.
Yes.
And the fact of the matter is that we change with time, right? A lot of women
Yeah.
will say, I'm different. My body's different before and after pregnancy. But would you give back your kid? Like
Right.
we change, but it's not always a bad thing. And
Yeah.
I think that, one of the secret goals of the book was really empowering women enough to be able to begin to unhitch this external validation. Like,
Mhm.
what's the 20-year-old doing? What's the 30-year-old doing? I'm 43. What does that mean? To unhitch that external validation and to be able to find it internally. For
Yeah.
you to be able to say, you know what? I'm 41. I have a child. special needs.
Mhm.
I did carnivore. I've healed my autoimmunity, and I am fucking. Oops, I am
It's
amazing.
fine.
Sorry, I am amazing. Sorry, that just came out.
I
You know,
love it.
I am amazing, right?
Yeah.
And I think that so many of us, like if I were to look at you, I could say, "Oh my God, these are the 5 things I think they're so awesome about you." Like it's so easy for us to see beauty in other people. It's so
Yes.
hard to see it in ourselves. Like if I were to
Yes.
challenge anyone that's listening now, right now, 5 things that you love about yourself. Most people look like a deer in headlights. It's
Yes.
like, I don't know, but I know what I like about you, So we
Yes.
have to learn how to love who we are and where we are, and that we evolve with time. That's what happens. We age, and
Yeah.
as difficult, I think society has a really hard time with death. We have a hard time
Yes.
with things ending and new beginnings, and we have a hard time with that. And I think one of the most empowering things you can do as a woman is to accept yourself exactly for who you are, where you've been, and to be excited about where you're going, and not to try to be the 25-year-old, the eternal 25-year-old. Like, God, I was such an
Yes.
idiot when I was
Oh my
25.
God.
Like I
It's
would
right. Do
never
not want
go
to go
back to
back.
that. I would
No.
never to be that. I mean, I love her. She was doing
Yes.
her best, but I'm so much happier in this 40-year-old body
Oh yeah.
with this 40-year-old with 43-year-old wisdom
Yeah.
than I was 2 decades ago.
Yeah, and I love your book. I think it really does embody that and encourages women to slow down, to tune into their bodies, to actually listen and to learn to love themselves and stop the hateful talk and
Yeah.
stop this dialogue that we've had it just ingrained into us. This, like you said, this kind of patriarchal society. It's been ingrained into us since we were little kids, that we have to be a certain way and we have to push harder and we have to be smaller. And yeah, so I think your book does an amazing job of embodying that.
Thank you.
Yeah. So where can my listeners find you if they want to follow you, if they maybe even want to work with you, join some of your communities? How would they be able to do that?
Sure. Yeah. So the first step, if you're feeling called to it, would be to pick up the book. So you can find
Yes.
that at Amazon. You can find it Barnes and
Yay.
Noble. You can find like all over the place.
Yes.
Most online retailers have it. If once you buy the book, you can head over to. I have some free bonuses that accompany the book. So you can go to bettybodybook.com. We have a monthly membership of Betties. So I call my people my Betties. So it's called Hello Betty. So you can go to hellobetty.club if you want to learn a little bit more about, we talk about fitness. We do fitness challenges. We talk about the divine feminine. We talk about the female psyche. So some of the things we were talking about today with the, patriarchy and stuff, and how we relate to ourselves under that influence. And then you can also find me on Instagram, pretty active on the gram. So Dr. first name, last name. So Dr. Stephanie Estima on Instagram.
Awesome. And I'll make sure I link all of that in the show notes below. And this will
Mm.
be on podcast and on YouTube. So it'll be on both platforms so they can find you everywhere you are.
Awesome. Thank you.
Thank you so much for coming on today. I really appreciate it.
Thank you. It's wonderful.